should definitely continue to invest in the indigenous communities, the smallholder farmers, and the local innovators who are protecting and expanding natural carbon sinks. But that should not blind us to the fact that Africa also provides an ideal potential home for scaling the latest and most ambitious of climate technologies.
Magic Water is a Kenyan social enterprise that specializes in air-to-water technologies. It uses a simple condensation system where we condense the humidity in the atmosphere into water. Our niche is very arid regions where people experience water scarcity, where other solutions have failed.
It is at once about climate mitigation and cushioning communities against the worst impacts of climate change.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Maxine Joselo. I'm a climate policy and politics reporter here at the Washington Post, and I'm so excited to be joined by these three lovely people on stage next to me. Let me go ahead and introduce the three of them, starting with James to my left. James Orungu Mwangi is the CEO of Africa Climate Ventures. Then moving to Beth in the middle here. Beth Koigi is the founder of Magic Water and a Rolex laureate. And finally, last but not least, Wanjira Mathai is the Managing Director of Africa and Global Partnerships at the World Resources Institute. She's also the Chief Africa Advisor to the Bezos Earth Fund. And a quick note to our audience, Jeff Bezos is the owner of the Washington Post. Thank you all for joining me here today.
Great to be here.
Thanks.
So James, I'm starting with you. I gave you a heads up backstage, so hopefully you're ready. You launched Africa Climate Ventures with the goal of identifying opportunities for investment in climate-forward enterprises. Back up a little bit and tell us what potential do you see for Africa to be a climate action powerhouse, and what is the biggest barrier to realizing that potential?
Well, I'll start with the biggest barrier and go forward from there, which is the minute we talk about Africa, everyone probably goes to one, it's only about 4 to 5% of global emissions, not a very big investment destination, really besides the point in solving the challenge of getting to 50% emissions reduction by 2030 that was articulated earlier. What that overlooks is very few of the things we need to scale in order to get to net zero don't either require large amounts of particular natural resources, whether biodiversity, mineral resources, etc., a strong and robust and growing labor force, and copious amounts of renewable energy. And it so turns out that Africa is the one continent on planet Earth that has a superabundance of uncompeted for endowments of all three. And so my argument is getting the world to net zero means doing a lot more of the world's business in the greenest continent left on the planet.
James, thank you for that. And I hear here in the audience. Beth, turning to you, more than half of all Kenyans lack access to clean drinking water, an issue made more pervasive by long periods of drought. You are quite literally pulling water from thin air. How do you do that? Tell us more about how this technology works.
Thank you, Maxine, for that question. And actually, the statistic was at the moment, the World Bank estimates by 2030 that 40% of the demand for fresh water will, there will be a huge gap between demand and supply by 40% for fresh water. So the situation is becoming more and more grim, and a lot of countries are becoming more and more water scarce. And I was actually surprised. I was reading a post about the UK. Of all the places, they are estimated that they'll run out of water by 2050. So if countries like UK are running out of water, what about Kenya? We'll be gone. So I started Magic Water, which is a social enterprise in Kenya. We work with communities that are experiencing physical water scarcity. These are communities in arid and semi-arid regions, communities that feel the effects of famine and drought and prolonged periods of lack of rainfall. We provide them with basic clean drinking water by getting water from the atmosphere. So this technology has been there since the beginning of time. There are some plants that use this technology, some animals that get all their drinking water from this technology. So we basically condense the humidity in the atmosphere, because that is, when there is drought, that is the only water resource. Most groundwater dry up. It's impossible to get surface water when there is famine. So the only resource we get is the atmosphere, and we use condensation to get that water.
Wonderful. Wanjira, turning to you. Of the 40 countries identified as the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, more than half are in Africa. How do the innovations that Beth and James just described have the potential to help communities in Africa whose lives have been disrupted by the effects of climate change?
Well, that's a really good question, and the premise that both James and Beth have set is really underscores the vulnerability that we exist in. There is the reality of the disproportionate impact of climate on especially Africa, and the fact that it's for reasons not of our own doing. And I think that the justice element of that has to be well understood, and with that, a certain level of solidarity and partnership that comes from the partnerships that we establish. But it is not altogether a sob story, right? This is an Africa that is basically saying, we are the solution hub as well. And in addition to the two, and in fact, in many ways, a companion to what Beth does, is just the role of Africa's natural resources. The fact that Africa has the greatest restoration potential in the world, the fact that restoration businesses are on the rise, that you can actually restore nature and create a livelihood at the same time is extraordinary. And we are seeing that transform landscapes around bamboo and riverine areas. We're seeing macadamia nut producers literally catalyze agroforestry systems on farm because of the demand for some of these agricultural products. We know that nature is so underfunded. You know, here's the thing. I always think that the one thing we all know and agree on is carbon as a source, but beyond carbon, imagine the services that markets don't actually quantify. Pollination, air quality, the work that Beth is doing that is actually enhanced by having a healthy ecosystem, agriculture, ecotourism, and on and on. A lot of those have zero value in the marketplace if we were to go out and say, invest in this asset that is nature. That's part of our problem. I think we have, we are endowed with the healthiest lung of the planet. I like to talk about the Congo forest because this is an ecosystem that sustains life as we know it. We know that without the Congo forest, there would be no Nile River, and without the Nile, we don't even want to go there. That's a different discussion on this panel. So I really remain a great champion of nature and the role it plays in cushioning us against the worst impacts of climate as we build on more sustainable green economies.
Wanjira, I love what you were saying just now about the value of nature. I want to return to that if we have time, but coming back to James, how do you decide which projects to invest in? Walk us through your process of assessing projects.
Yeah, so we begin from this thesis that there's an underappreciated potential for Africa to realize transformative climate positive growth. It's a lot of words. What we're basically saying is generate large amounts of incoming investment and development from actually contributing to increasing the global emissions budget or carbon budget rather than detracting from it. How would one do that? Firstly, by leapfrogging the 1.5 billion people on the continent directly to green solutions in a range of sectors where they already make sense for the continent, usually earlier than elsewhere. A classic example of this is distributed green ammonia is something you can do, right? You can take renewable energy and make green ammonia distributed way. It's just not cost competitive with ammonia delivered to you, say, in fertilizer if you live in a well-functioning supply chain country in the global north. Actually, though, if you're an African farmer, you pay the highest price on earth for a molecule of ammonia in your fertilizer. And so today, the technology today, at day zero, at prototype stage, already is cost competitive with your alternative. And that allows you to start going into this technology that likely will be one of the dominant ways in which we deliver nutrients to farms a decade or two from now, and actually be early adopters because it's better than our alternative. So that's one area, looking at places to leapfrog. The other is saying, where can Africa be competitive as a destination for alternative production? Right now, one of the big challenges we're facing in a range of companies around the world, including Amazon, is where do we put our data centers? We're driving up all these emissions. And the question is, where can you find functionally infinite capacity, green energy capacity, to deploy data centers, right? We're thinking about 7% of global electricity consumption by the end of this decade. And our argument is, for the location non-sensitive components of this, well, we have undeveloped renewable energy resources in Africa. It allows us to attract revenue that is dominated in dollars. You heard the challenge earlier. If you invest in energy and all your income is in local currency, you have a problem paying for the energy. But if you actually build industries that attract export revenues, like exporting energy in the form of compute, that problem is solved. And the third area is looking at sectors like carbon dioxide removal, right? Saying we're going to overshoot in all likelihood. That means we need to really gear up and incentivize young people and communities to look after nature at scale, deploy technologies like hybrid technologies like biochar into agriculture, and on the far end, take some of that renewable energy and our geological assets and actually do direct air capture and mineralization in the best basalt reserves in the world, which are in the East African Rift Valley, which has capacity to store hundreds of billions of tons of carbon dioxide if we can figure out energy efficient ways to gather it from the atmosphere. So we look at technologies in each of those spaces. The question we're asking ourselves is, do we believe this business, if we can get it started, has a chance, by virtue of being in Africa, of being a world beater?
Thank you for walking us through that. And Beth, you're the innovator of this group. Could you tell us about your funding journey and whether it was easy or difficult to get funding for Magic Water, and what opportunities you see for other innovators in the climate space to seek funding?
So fundraising for Magic Water is quite difficult. And this is something a lot of water or people who have ventures in water can testify. Like, a lot of investment funding shy away from specifically water, mostly because of the obvious reasons. There's very high capital cost as compared to the returns. The returns are not something that is attractive to investors. And then again, water ventures require patient capital. So there's all these complexities that come with water specifically. So of course there is minimal funding for that, but it has become better. When I was starting Magic Water in 2018, it was very minimal. Right now I'm seeing a lot of funding specifically looking for water ventures. It's just that still, it's hard to tell a person, oh, you're investing this money, but you can only get so much. So it's a game of pull and push between investors and water ventures. But I am hopeful that we'll get there. I think it's a big start that people are looking at water as a venture that can be invested in. So there is some hope, and I'm hoping in the next few years we'll get people interested to invest in water.
Great. Wanjira, you bring over 2 decades of experience advocating for social and environmental change. Tell us about the work you're doing with the World Resources Institute in Africa right now, in particular to support women entrepreneurs who are working on climate solutions.
Absolutely. At WRI, we like to think of ourselves as ecosystem builders, that we support the ecosystem within which entrepreneurs like Beth and James can thrive. But here's the sad story. Entrepreneurs are struggling. They're struggling in the world's best ecosystem for business. James laid it out really nicely. The youngest and fastest growing workforce. Look at the demographic dividend that is on the African continent and look at anywhere else, the average age or the median age in Kenya is 19 years old. That's why young people today are on the street saying, we are ready for business. And they're not, it is one of the most optimistic stories today. We have some of the best solar potential in the world, we know that. But investments are simply not flowing. And so ecosystem builders like us are saying we have to shift the mindset. We have to banish the tyranny of low expectations. The fact that actually we have the best opportunities and the world, quite frankly, will not meet its climate or development goals if we do not unlock Africa's climate and development potential. That's where the solutions are today for deep decarbonization. That's where the solutions are today for this demographic dividend that is brilliant, but is literally looking for meaningful investment. I was shocked recently when I heard that the debt, at least the risk perception on the African continent is based on two individuals who sit in Cape Town and may not have left Cape Town by the time they determine that Africa is risky. That is reckless. And we've got to shift the understanding of the real potential we have. We don't have much time at all, and we have real opportunities. That's the role that we play at WRI, is to really shine a light. But it's frustrating when, in fact, the partnerships are missing that make this reality visible.
James, I'm going to come back to you for this one, and sort of continuing the thread from the last panel with the IMF director, where we were talking about this idea of the moral imperative of developing society in a way that is low carbon, even though we know that these industrialized developed nations have historically polluted the most, and poorer, less developed nations have historically polluted the least and released the fewest emissions into our atmosphere. Right now, hundreds of millions of Africans still lack access to electricity. Does that make it easier or harder to develop economies in Africa in a low carbon way?
Yeah. So on one level, it rhetorically makes it harder because people see other people used a previous set of shortcuts to industrialization in a sense and say, why can't we use the same? Part of the way I answer that is to say that Kenya, if you go to the coast of Kenya or the coast of South Africa, you'll see humpback whales migrating up and down the coast different points of the year. And I point to them and I say, 200 years ago, that's how you lit your streets. Should we insist that we have not been allowed as Africans to exploit our humpback whale population, and we must now use them to light our streets? Technology moves on. The reason we no longer use whale oil to light our streets is, one, it's a terrible way to handle one of the most amazing species on Earth, and two, it just doesn't make economic sense. And when you look at the math, right, 60% of the world's best solar resources in Africa. The challenge is not that the energy is not available, that we're not willing to recognize that it has a higher upfront capex, but a much lower lifetime cost. It goes back to the cost of capital that the IMF director was talking about. And on one level, it's about getting that cost of capital down so that people can invest in energy access for their own lives. On a different level, it's recognizing the ways it's blinding us to opportunities for the whole planet. I'll give one specific example. 25% of the world's bauxite, which is used to make aluminum, comes from Africa. Almost none of it is processed in Africa, which, remember, has a massive superabundance of renewable energy untapped. That bauxite and processing it to aluminum is responsible for something like 300 to 400 million tons of carbon a year. Investing in African energy systems and moving smelters onto the continent for Africa's own raw material exports, and I just chose aluminum because it's the simplest one to do the math on, we could go on for days, would create jobs, would simplify global supply chains, would diversify sources for critical materials and key materials and critical minerals, and would create new demand for global markets. In a way, keeping Africa at the bottom of and excluded from value addition in all of the globe supply chains is excluding the globe from benefiting from Africa's energy. It's compounding Africa's poverty, and it's making it harder for everyone to reach their climate targets. I ask you, other than our old historical prejudices, who is this system serving?
Thank you, James. And I think we can all agree that we shouldn't be using whale oil to light our streets. Beth, your home country of Kenya suffered through severe flooding earlier this year. What have been the challenges in rebuilding?
I think of late there have been a lot of disaster happening all over the world, and a lot of countries are suffering in one way or the other. And the thing to blame is climate change. And these things are going to become more and more regular. And of course, like for example in Kenya right now, I think we are struggling with the governance. So a lot of things are being left. So I don't think, we just came out of 3-year long drought, and then immediately we got flooding. So already that is a problem. We are having two extremes, the opposite of each other, and one is the solution to the other, so that tells you a lot. But at the same time, our governance has let things go. Like we are not having more accountability. Things are just left as they were. So for example, during the flooding, some of the roads have not been rebuilt, and some of these things are being seen in all sectors. Like when something happens, there is no accountability. No one wants to take the first step and actually do it. And I'm very thankful that we are having more and more young people who are standing up, and they're seeing all these inequalities and all these challenges, and they're taking the front line, and they want to start giving solutions to some of these challenges rather than waiting for a government or for a higher authority to do something.
Thank you. And just looking at the clock here, I think we're running a little low on time. We have time for one more question, and that's for Wanjira. So to close, your mother actually started the Greenbelt movement, and that earned her a Nobel Prize 20 years ago. You have really continued that work. You've really continued that work and aligned yourself with that work yourself. So as we close, I just wanted to ask you about the future. What gives you hope that the work that you're doing will deliver a more promising future for future Africans, much as you and your mother have dedicated your lives to?
Well, thank you for that. We pay tribute to her all the time. She was inspiring, and what foresight. We say all the time in Kenya that she was 30 years ahead of us in protecting some of the precious green spaces we enjoy. I mean, I think the thing is, the work we all do is not only about Africa. It's about the rest of the world. It's about all of us. And the extent to which we appreciate the interconnectivity, the fact that we are connected. This is well understood in African ideas like Ubuntu, I am because you are. And that is fundamentally what all of this is about. That when we had the COVID crisis, we remember how much we sort of went into our own selves. And actually, it was in our best interest to take care of everybody else. We would have been better off, all of us, had we not done that. The climate crisis is no different. I feel the work that we do, if we don't do it because it's the right thing to do, we do it because it's in our best interest, all of us.
Well, thank you. That's a great way to close out a fantastic panel. Thank you all so much, James, Beth, and Wanjira.